rebellions are built on hope.
And welcome to a very special episode of Radio Rebellion, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Alberto Calderon. With us, my co-host, Oti Kenobi, and special guest, author of Path of Deceit, Defy the Storm, and the most recent High Republic novel, Temptation of the Force. Tessa Gratton is with us today here. Tessa, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Hi, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I've been having a lot of fun talking about temptation, so I'm excited to dig into more.
You've been everywhere. We've seen some of those interviews. Thank you so much, again, for taking the time. Oti, sorry I skipped you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I arrived in Florida yesterday, and it's somehow hotter than in Puerto Rico. So I'm dealing with that.
It's hot, it's muggy, it's difficult out here. I know you're even southern than where I am here in North Florida, but it's bad.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah. All right, but enough weather talk. And I know people were all excited also about The Acolyte. We'll get to that on Saturday. So if you're watching us today, thank you again for being here. We'll get to The Acolyte on Saturday. A lot of fun stuff over there. Tessa, when we have guests here for the first time, we want to know a little bit more about them, kind of what is their Star Wars stories. Like, we all love Star Wars, obviously. But when you get to either do a show every week or get to the level that you want to write Star Wars book, there's usually something more that gravitates us to the franchise. Do you have one of those Star Wars stories? So how did you get involved in this universe to then want to be a writer and tell those type of stories out there?
Well, I don't remember a time when I wasn't a fan of Star Wars.
Yeah.
My parents were both huge fans of the original trilogy, and I saw Return of the Jedi at a drive-in movie theater when I was about 4 years old.
Okay.
And it's actually one of my earliest memories. I don't remember a lot, but I do remember really loving the tiny murder teddy bears. So I was an Ewok fan first, and then a Princess Leia fan second, and eventually really got into like everything I could find about the Jedi. I it really was a lifelong fandom for me.
Mm-hmm.
I read all of the books from the 80s and 90s. And I had my high school graduation party was like Star Wars themed, and my mom and I really got into it. So we just had a lot of fun. And when the first prequel trilogy movie came out, we had a huge party too. It was just like, my parents also loved it. And so it was just always part of my life. To be honest though, it never really occurred to me that I could write a Star Wars book. So it's not really anything that I ever particularly wanted to do until much more recently. Even as some of my peers and friends started working for Star Wars, it didn't seem very likely because the kinds of books I write on my own are not very action-packed, and they're, much more complicated, sort of like emotionally and ethically complicated kinds of things, which hasn't been what I have associated with Star Wars until much more recently. And then Justina Ireland made me. So
we'll thank her. We'll thank her because
I thank her too.
Oh, I'm sure it's, I don't know, just being involved in that universe. So just even if I get a like or a retweet from someone that works even remotely close to Star Wars, we all lose our mind. So I'm pretty sure that being kind of into that world for the first time was probably something similar.
Yes, I was really excited about it when Justina first started talking to me on the down low about Project Luminous, because I was her friend who really cared about Star Wars. And, Justina has grown to love it, but wasn't a lifelong fan. And so, she really, I think, got a lot out of talking to me, because she'd be like, we're discussing this thing about like these one guys. And I'm like, oh my God, really? You're talking about that? And so I think it was satisfying for her. on that level. And that's when I really started getting invested in the High Republic. And like, I remember when they first announced it and all, all of those kinds of things, both as a fan and as a behind the scenes, like really close friend of Justina's. So, yeah.
It is one of those things that we talk about here. I love hearing those type of stories because all of us came to Star Wars from different kind of sides, either lifelong fans, like you said, from 1984. I know people that got into it when the prequels came out, or even people that know that sequel trilogy got them into it, and then they just gravitated to everything inside the world. And that's what we like to hear. Star Wars brings everyone together. And I didn't have that cool of a high school that we had a Star Wars theme party at the end.
Oh, no. It was just my personal family did it. My high school did not care about Star Wars or parties. I went to a all-girls private Catholic high school, so there was no Star Wars there. But that was just my mom and I did that for our family.
That's so cool.
I actually went to a Star Wars high school, so.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Making us feel bad.
It was a Catholic all-boys school. So, yeah.
All Star Wars.
Tessa, so you talked a little bit about the Ewoks and Princess Leia. Do you have a favorite Glub Shido, like background character or something like that?
I really don't think I do.
Okay.
I've been thinking about this, and I just can't come up with anybody in particular. Okay. So I'm really sorry to be disappointing with that answer.
All right, we gotta end it now. Okay, thanks for being here.
Maybe next time I'll come up with somebody.
I can actually kind of relate to that because I was never into the EU. And for me, the movies were the movies. Like what happened, I wasn't paying attention to the background. So when I started getting into Star Wars Twitter, people were talking about all these people. I was like, who the hell is that? Where's this person in the movie? So like I cling to Ben Quaterneros from Phantom Menace. And I'm like, he's my guy. And he's been my guy for like the past 5 years.
Yeah, that's great. You've got an answer. You can just go with that. I need to figure it out. But to be perfectly honest, since I started writing for the High Republic, I've done my best to like expunge almost all other Star Wars media because I don't want to confuse myself. I confuse the Star Wars High Republic technology with Star Trek often enough that it would be even harder with the movies and the TV shows because they're like, 200 years apart. And so I do my best to just stay in my little High Republic bubble.
Okay.
There's too much. It's too much out there to keep track of everything. And same thing, I was joking before. I didn't have a Glub Shido growing up either. It's now like Otti says, everyone talks about it. Well, I guess I gotta pick someone because when people, the guy running with the ice cream bucket in Empire Strikes Back on Cloud City, they're like, I don't care about that guy.
I never noticed him.
Yeah, but then you gave me, I know it's not Seaweed Man in Mandalorian, like pirate captain. I'm like, I love this guy. I want to be Captain Shaw, whatever his name. I love him. So you mentioned a little bit about Tessa. I mean, Justina Ireland kind of talking to you a little bit about the High Republic, and you kind of bring, Star Wars, great. How was that process of joining an already established universe, kind of a new segment on Star Wars with the High Republic coming into it with Phase 2 for you?
The fact that it was Phase 2 really helped out a lot because it was a prequel. And so I didn't have to jump right into writing established characters with an established plot line. Obviously I, read all of the Phase 1 books and, really dug into what I knew was supposed to happen in Phase 3, which at that point was not very much. So there was a lot of information, and the original 5 writers, had a really solid dynamic. They've been working together for a couple of years, but not only were they incredibly welcoming, I think they were all deeply relieved that Zoraida and Lydia and George and I were coming in because it was so much work for them. They're like, oh, thank God, please come help us.
Here you go. Bye.
Yeah.
A stack of notes that big.
Right. It was a lot, but fortunately it was all virtual. But since I was writing Path of Deceit with Justina, which was the first book of phase 2, we really had a lot of leeway when it came to the details. Like the big parts were there. Like, you know, we knew we were setting up the whole row, you know, ancestry, and we knew what we needed to do with the Path of the Open Hand, and, you know, who was going to live and who was going to die, basically. But beyond a bunch of those details, we really could develop it however we wanted to. And then, you know, there's a whole approval process where, you know, not only does our director and story group, but also all the other writers, you know, have a chance to look at the outlines and, you know, have comments. And so it's a very complicated, dynamic process. But for the most part, like, the development was me and Justina figuring out how we wanted to tell this story. So it was the smoothest possible way I could have jumped into what is something like book 11 of a 25 book series, something like that.
Yeah, just hearing those numbers, it's like, oh my God.
It's so many books. But on the other hand, it really makes Path of Deceit a really good new entry point. So that was also good for me as a new writer, because I could basically say, yes, come read this new Star Wars that I wrote. You can and certainly should start with phase 1, but you don't have to. You can start with phase 2 and read in chronological order instead of publishing order. Come, you know, have a lot of fun with my doomed romance and sexy cults and cute little monsters. So,
Kev Mosink, we barely knew you. We miss you.
Yeah,
I'm still hurt by it.
Me too.
That book was so weird in a fun way, because at first I was like, wait, is this like a Romeo and Juliet thing? And then it goes off the rails, the leveler arrives, and I was like, oh, okay, wow.
That's
a really cute leveler, though.
A baby leveler.
Just make it a baby, and we'll give a pass to all the murdering out there. He's just so cute. Like, murder.
It's not really murder on the leveler's part.
Yeah, I mean,
they're just existing.
They're surviving. They have to do what they can to survive. I remember, like you mentioned, when I read Path of Deceit, and I was a little bit nervous. Oh man, we've already known all these characters from phase 1 for so long, and now we're going back and I will start over. But Path of Deceit was like you mentioned, it was a great introduction to phase 2. You don't need to know anything. It's still gonna connect if you read some of the other books. I don't know. It was just not because you are here. It was just a perfect way to bring people into phase 2 and 200 years or whatever it was before everything. It's a nice way to go into it. And then, of course, it turns into High Republic and people start dying.
Yeah. That's not my fault.
No,
it's Kevin's fault.
All right. But it also goes to point how much we care about those characters. So just in one book, by the end, we're like, no, why did we have to lose Kev, Mo, and everyone else?
Yeah.
So, great job.
Well, I made up for it by killing 0 named characters in Temptation. So,
well, we're gonna get
true.
So.
And I thank you. There were a few moments that I was afraid for a bunch of them. So I thank you for
those last pages. I had like when Mark and Ro arrives at Coruscant, I was like, he's gonna blow something up. Like, I'm still reeling.
Okay, go. We gotta keep going.
So as we've mentioned, you've written like in different genres, as to say. You've written YA, you've written young reader novels, you've written the adult novels. Is there like a difference in your process to writing like each different style, or I don't know how we call it? Is it like genre, or
we usually call them like age categories, categories like that? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, because at the end of the day, I love the young readers, for example. I know a lot of people dismiss them, but it still feels like Star Wars. So like I like going through all of the different stories. So that's why I want to know like, how the process changes for each one.
The actual process itself doesn't change very much at all, because ultimately it's just you get your assignment, and then figure out how you want to tell the story you're supposed to tell, do an outline, and then turn it all in and rinse and repeat, basically. So on a really basic level, it is the same. The biggest difference for me is between the middle grade, the young readers, and the adult, mostly because of how much has to be going on in the adult books that you have to focus on. And in the middle grade, there can be like a huge galactic war going on, but your focus is a lot tighter. And so even if you have like 10 characters, there's probably only 1 or 2, maybe 3 points of view, and they're basically on the same mission. So, it's one main plot with like a little scattering of like character subplots. This is how I think of it. Whereas the adult books, you could be telling a story about the same galactic war, but you've got like 5 main storylines from 5 main points of view that you're trying to weave together to tell, the main storyline. But each one of those characters, I think, should have their own plot. So I end up with like several different subplots that are hopefully all going to be able to be grafted onto the main thing. So it's a more complicated like structural and plot story, as opposed to the much more simple plot and structure of a middle grade. And then the YA, it really depends. Like, I think that Path of Deceit is much more along the lines of the structure of a middle grade, where it was really just telling one main storyline. And, a few of the characters had different, roles to play, or different like perspectives of that main storyline, but it was relatively straightforward for everyone. But then Defy the Storm is much more complicated in the way that one of the adults it would be. And that's partly just because there was so much on our plate when we were trying to figure out how to get everything we needed to get into that story. And that's part of both the challenge and the payoff of phase 3, I think.
Yeah, I remember reading Defy the Storm is how much more can the Jedi take? Stop throwing more stuff at them. Now we have the Blight. Please give them a breather. But also, like you mentioned, and Oti also mentioned about the middle grade books. My first introduction to High Republic was A Test of Courage. Again,
Me
Justin
too.
Ireland. Oh, there we go. Yay, Test of Courage, buddies. And introduced me to Vanessa, which then became one of my favorite characters. But like you mentioned, because it's a more tighter story, gives, at least for myself, more time to build on the actual characters that you're spending time with, instead of worrying about this big galactic battle. So spending time with each character, then you get invested, even if it's for a younger crowd. Adults can also enjoy it.
I think so too. It's, the middle grades tend to really, like you said, sink into the problem that the kids are facing, instead of having to just be like, okay, we solved this problem. Holy crap, there's another big problem over there we got to go solve. And that really lends itself to a really adventurous kind of story that I think Star Wars, especially the earlier movies, ultimately are as well. Like the original trilogy, those stories are very simple, but the way that they let the storytelling, get you invested in what's going on with this little handful of people trying to rebel against a whole empire. I think that's one of the reasons that the middle grades can be such great Star Wars.
Yeah, it's something that Oti says here. Like, Star Wars is simple, whether it's good guys and bad guys, and it's like
I get very nervous whenever like I think it's gonna get complicated because it's what I always say. Like the bad guys wear dark cloaks and use red swords, and the good guys use white cloaks and use blue swords. Like it doesn't get more simple than that.
Yeah.
So yeah. Talking about bad guys, my favorite bad guy in all of Star Wars is this guy over here. I've been obsessed with Mark Rowe, and he's interesting because he doesn't use he uses weird clothes sometimes, and he has a yellow lightsaber. Well,
he has a lot
bunch
of lightsabers.
Yeah, he has a bunch of them now.
Grievous is jealous of him. It's like, I need some of those.
Yes. But I was also obsessed with Marta Rowe, his great grandmother, which you co-wrote their first appearance in the High Republic. So I just wanted to know how that character came to be. How did you all come up with this insane woman whose insanity has crossed the generations?
Space.
She didn't start off that way, but we knew she had to get there. So that was part of the challenge of writing Marta, was what kind of 17-year-old kid could be, the seed for what will eventually become, the whole Nihil and Markian specifically. Like what we only knew a few specific plot things that were definitely going to happen to her when we first started. And we worked with Cavan quite a bit with this, since he was writing the direct sequel, where arguably most of the really bad stuff that happens to Marta happens. So we were really setting up her character and who she is so that it would be believable when she reacts the way that she reacts to everything. Like really triggering all of that with Kevmo. And both his life and death. And so we knew we needed to have her in conversation with Yana as this is her Evereni side, and this is who she is, both with and against the Evereni assumptions and how they're supposed to be as a species. And then Marta and Kevmo as sort of complements and foils for each other with regards to morality and philosophy and the Force and faith and fanaticism and all these kind of things. And so really with those three characters, in a lot of ways, both Yana and Kevmo were there to try and prove the thesis of this really great, sweet, innocent Evereni is going to become essentially a crazy monster, and here's why, and you're gonna love it. So we had fun.
Kevin may have written the insanity part, but you wrote one of my favorite Marta moments. First of all, the whole story of the closed fist has no claws. I love that story. But my favorite Marta moment is in Path of Deceit at the end when she sees the mother unleash the leveler on Kevmo, and she goes it was a Jedi. I was like, oh, this is who this person is. Okay.
It brings balance.
Yeah,
man. I love Yana Rowe. I'm sorry what happened to Yana, but
she's great.
Marta Rowe, again, what a great character. I'm I know that I hated her, love to hate, don't you see it's a cult? Just get out. It's no, she's so into it. And then she just goes nuts and now appears on visions 250 years later.
I need a Marta shirt now.
We need more Marta.
Yeah.
So you mentioned writing with Justina, Path of Deceit, and also Defy the Storm. How's that process like of working with a partner, writing with someone else, and of trying to decide, I want to write this character or I want to write this part of the story? How do you guys balance that?
Justina and I are really pretty good at it. We've been friends since 2015 and have read for each other our non-Star Wars books, and we like a lot of the same things, but we're very good at very different things. And so in a lot of ways it was pretty easy for us to divide how we were going to do the work. I was specifically brought on, like Justina really wanted me to work on Path of Deceit with her because I love writing relationships and kissing and like emotional conflict and all that kind of stuff.
I know.
And Justina does not. And so coming into that was pretty much I was hired to really develop the romance between Marta and Kevmo and be the one like really focusing on that relationship. And so with Path of Deceit, it was very, I'm not even sure we really talked about it, but Justina wrote Yana and I wrote Marta, and then we split the Kevmo scenes pretty evenly down the line. And then like she wrote Sunshine and I wrote Aslan. And so I think those are all the point of view, but it really ended up being very balanced. And we had a lot of fun, and it added to a lot of dynamism when we were writing, because we wrote in order, and so we would trade off chapters and be able to like have our characters reacting to what the previous author wrote in the last chapter, even though we knew the general outline of the whole book. And then when it came to Defy the Storm, it was also pretty easy because we knew we were going to use Vernestra and Avon, and those are Justina's characters, so Justina wrote them. And we had a lot of conversations about who else we were going to use and who I wanted to write. And so we went back and forth about Silvestri and Jordana a lot. And ultimately, obviously, landed on Jordana for me to write. And then I basically begged Justina to let me use Xylan.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how fun? I'm just going to go right. How fun is it to write Silent Graph?
It's great. I would like to put him in every book that I ever write ever again. So I don't think that'll be possible, but because I'm already writing non-High Republic books. But he makes every scene better and like just brighter. And I really, really needed that, especially in Temptation, because as we've already discussed, the Jedi are really going through it. And everyone is dealing with horrible trauma and like consistent trauma, and like nothing is getting better. But when Xylan walks into a screen, at least it's like pretty and colorful, and I'm gonna laugh. So even if Avar's not gonna laugh, somebody is. So he's just so great. He lights up a room.
There's a scene in this book when they pick him up, and I love the detail, and it comes back again that he came in with bags, and everyone's like, "You have bags."
Yes, he's fleeing for his life, but he packed in advance.
He was. No, he was a character when he showed up. I found him so annoying, but as his intentions have shifted and we actually start to see who he really is. Every time he shows up, I'm so happy because of that. Because I'm like dying to see what is he gonna bring to the scene.
I love it.
Like Out of the Shadows, right? That's where he first came out. It's like, we hate this guy. Why are you trusting him? Well, he has a big fluffy dog with Plinka. So he's a dog person. You gotta like him a little bit. And then with Defy the Storm, we get so much with him and that relationship with Care, Santeca. And then, of course, in Temptation of the Force, kind of just brings everything together. He's helping out here in his own way. He still wants something. But just coming with the bags. He's getting shot out, whatever. Let me get my clothes on. I need some perfume. And so it's a great... Silent and... I forgot the name from Phase 2. The other...
Which one?
Axel?
No, and Axel, Axel great. Like those two together would create more chaos. I know actually it's already chaos, but come on, those two together.
I think they would be like the wrong side of magnets, though, and just like shoot off into other directions.
They'd be stabbing each other in the back, probably. Like,
maybe.
Then they'll call
for the right price or motivation.
Then they'll go and have some wine or something together and just laugh it off. So
that's true.
When you were writing did you know you were writing Temptation of the Force as you're writing Defy the Storm, and you start putting little things that you're going to explore later on in Temptation, or was there, okay, I wrote Defy the Storm, and then, oh, you're also going to be writing this book? How do you, I guess, balance going back to back writing those two books?
It was really, really, really hard on my stomach and my home life.
I'm sure.
It essentially was all happening at the same time.
Oh, wow.
With regards to like developing the stories. We did the outline for Defy the Storm and started writing it. And then as we were still drafting Defy the Storm, I needed to start outlining Temptation of the Force. And so I'm pretty sure by the time we started writing Defy that I was going to be writing Temptation. And so, for the most part, it was plot things that were changing, particularly with regards to the Storm Wall and the Jedis being able to get across and how they were going to do that. And even as we were writing Defy, George was still finishing Eye of Darkness. And so it was still like, okay, well, we know Avar is going to get across. How exactly is she going to get across? Because that has to happen before Defy the Storm. And then like we really struggled with having all of these beats across several books that in a lot of ways are essentially the same. And we needed to make sure we were building on each time across all of the books. And then also the middle grade, the escape from Velo, where they were also dealing with whether, being trapped behind the storm wall and how are they going to try to escape and like all that kind of stuff. And that, we had to do. And I knew I needed to create some back doors for myself, essentially, when it came to Temptation. And that is one of the reasons that I wanted to actually use Xylan's point of view in Defy, because I could let him explain a lot, but also obfuscate a lot. And, we get things done, but also not make a whole lot of, promises, because Xylan's not a promiser.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, I really needed people to stop hating him.
But it worked, by the way.
I'm glad. And I hope that is partly because of how entertaining he is from his own point of view, but also actually giving him some things he cares about aside from his dog. And so that was part of the point of bringing in Care, was for me to entertain myself with this long running joke about, Care's princess and Xylan's secret husband, which didn't end up being as long running in the actual published book as it originally was when I was writing it. But, giving Xylan someone to care about, who cared about him, who I was pretty sure readers would just like out the gate, because he's Care is very classic Star Wars rebel. What's not to love if you love Star Wars? And so, that was something that I did very intentionally, both for my own edification and also to, make sure that readers would want to go with me when I kept pulling Xylan through Temptation and continued using him as a way into Avon and what she was going to have to do from the middle grades. So it was just, the storm wall was a whole headache.
I can imagine.
Mostly for me specifically. I'm kidding. All of us hate it.
Almost as much as the Jedi. But because us as fans reading the book is, how are they gonna get through? There's no way to get through, and then I'm guessing for you guys, try to figure out a way that makes sense with that technology or whatever is going out there, and using the Jedi's power or their connection to the Force to be able to input all those numbers. it makes sense now, of course, but I'm sure the process of getting to it wasn't as easy.
It was not. We had many meetings about it.
Just in silent, there's a scene I love with him and Elzar when he's like, "What's in Naboo?" And he's like, "No, my dog." And he's like, "No. I know those eyes."
Yeah.
Like, and him being like, "Hey, it's okay. Like, you're not
Yeah.
weak. Like, it actually makes us stronger." So I really like that scene.
All right, so going to Temptation of the Force, we gotta get there.
Yep.
So that's, I mean, there's a lot. We can spend 2 hours talking about Temptation of the Force, and like you mentioned before, the kissing and the love scenes that we've been waiting for a long time. We'll get to that soon, but just in this book, seen as a chapter of Elzar giving Avar a new diadem that we know she kind of stripped away from everything that made her made her look like a Jedi, connected her to the Jedi Order at that point. A new diadem with 3 gems to represent all 3 of them with Stellan, and then talk about the heart, who's the brain, who's the brawn, and Elzar being the heart. How did you manage to do a story with those 3 when one of them is missing, like a big core of that group is missing, but still make it part of the story? Because we all want more Stellan Geos, and he's not there, or he's still there, because almost every decision that Avar and Elzar are making is with Stellan in mind.
You know, I have never gotten to write Stellan. He was dead by the time I joined the team.
Don't remind us.
And so in a lot of ways, I do think that actually made it easier for me to write this hole in their relationship, because in a lot of ways, it's also a hole in my relationship with them. You know, obviously I read all of the books in phase 1 multiple times as I was preparing to work on Temptation, especially focusing on the characters that I was going to be using directly. And so in that way, I really got to know Avar and Elzar, and then being able to talk with George a lot about what he was doing in Eye of Darkness and really how he was setting me up. And what Charles was doing in the Shadows of Starlight series, all that kind of stuff. I felt like I knew them, but I still don't really feel like I know Stellan anywhere near that level, and I won't until I get to write him maybe someday.
Knock on wood.
But yeah, but that was probably the easiest part of it. And yeah, I think I already mentioned that I really love to write relationships in general, and really messy, complicated relationships are my favorite thing. All of the Tessa Gratton books that aren't Star Wars really have messy disaster relationships that are what the story is really about.
Sure.
And sometimes including people who are dead. It's just so delicious when there's so much conflict, emotional, and people want different things or want the same thing, but other, you know, priorities like duty and justice or whatever are keeping them apart. So I really love it. And while it was a challenge, it's really just one of the reasons that I am a writer, is so that I have the chance to dig into different versions of these really core human emotions and relationship issues. So I loved it. And I did it less messily than I usually do it, because, you know, I had to start with an outline, and I'm not usually an outliner with my own work, particularly not to the detail that we need to for this like huge collaborative process that writing for the High Republic is. And so I really did most of the hard work when I wasn't typing words, like, you know, just like laying on my floor for several weeks, you know, for hours a day while I was working on Defy the Storm at the same time. But like I would switch over to my, okay, it's time to think about Temptation, like put on some music and just think about it, and then go for long walks. I walk every day, and, you know, letting myself, putting on the same music and just like thinking through dialogue and how I wanted their, particularly Avar and Elzar, when it came to relationship. But I also did this thinking really hard about Burry specifically, and like his emotional arc through the book. And so just I did so much thinking and like emoting, and I sent myself so many notes on my phone, like voice notes, where I'd later have to decipher them because they never spell even like Elzar the same way. So yeah, it was just really great and a really great challenge to bring all of what I love about messy disaster people into Star Wars. Like that, it was just so, I loved it. I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to put this messy Tessa Gratton mark on these poor people who just need a break.
Using that line of messy process to make this story, one of my favorite things about Temptation is how much it pulls from everything that we've read so far, like all the elements that come in. How do you make sure that the book is being consistent with the other books that came before, and maybe for someone who's coming in, how do you make sure everything is consistent through the entire story?
I did a lot of homework. I reread everything. I read the things that were being currently written, in the outlines. I took so many notes. I put sticky notes in the various books and highlighted things. And I really did my best to make several lists of, you have to remember all of these things for this character. You have to remember all of these things for this character. Here's all the plot things you have to remember, especially when it came to what are these characters most afraid of, because they all have to have their individual effect, like nameless effect reactions. And, that was maybe one of the harder parts, was holding so much information in my head, that making the book itself as much of a like complete, a reader can come into this even if they haven't read phase 1 for 2 years. They don't need to reread. They're still gonna know where we are and know what's going on, and making it as much of its own whole book. That a lot of that really landed on my editor at Random House Worlds, Tom Holler's shoulders. He really did that a lot and would come back and say, okay, here's where we are. I really think you need to earn this more, and maybe we should restructure the beginning a little bit to give readers a more immediate but also gentler introduction to these kind of things. Like he really helped me, particularly with structure, and then with making the book whole unto itself as much as it's possible to make book 19 of a 22 book series whole unto itself.
Oh man, we're so close to the end. You put it like,
Don't say that. Don't say that. A sillier question, but going back to relationship, what's the best romance? Avar and Elzar or Gela and Axel?
Well, obviously Avar and Elzar.
Okay.
of course.
I disagree, but I just want to disagree because I love Gela and Axel so much.
I do too. They're great. They're very delightful. But you haven't read the end of Avar and Elzar's romance yet, so how can you really completely judge?
I want to think I haven't read the end of Gela and Axel either. But
okay, that's fair. That's very fair.
All right, I know you just teased something. We're gonna go with it. You talk about the messy relationship in Temptation of the Forest. I just mentioned you spent weeks on the floor looking at the ceiling. We also, when we got to some chapters, you have to lie down and take it all in. So again, is that finally the case for all the shipping people out there and everyone that's been enjoying the Harry Potter for so many years? A lot of us were waiting for, okay, will there or won't they with Avar and Elzar? Stellan, unfortunately, out of the picture. We'll hopefully see him again. But how were you able, or how difficult, I guess, was to bring this relationship to the forefront of two Jedi Masters is something that we hasn't been exploring in Star Wars. Yes, Anakin, he was with a senator, and in Rebels you have Hera and Kanan, but two actual Jedi Masters at the height of their power or whatever they're standing in the council, but at the same time keeping in faith what we know about attachments and connection, and kind of keep the Jedi away from it, but still making it make sense. Because when I read how Avar talks about that relationship, if it's everything's connected through the Force and love connects us, then it can't be wrong. Attachments, that's wrong, but what we have is different. It's what you brought me back to the light. You brought me back to feeling the Force, and for Elzar is still feeling that pull to the dark, that if something happens to Avar, he doesn't know how he's going to react, and she's the one that's bringing him in and just trust what we have. How are you able to do that relationship, but still keep in mind what we know about Jedi and attachments and why they don't usually get together?
Well, in a lot of ways, I've been working on this argument for my whole life.
Yeah, you're like, finally, I'll be able to have my side.
I genuinely believe that the really hard line against attachments is at the core of what went wrong with the Jedi Order. Because people have to love, they have to have relationships. And, the Jedi is, they are a community. And so it's just so short-sighted to just be like, no, you can't love. I do think that the difference between attachment and love is essentially what Avar says. And it's, there's that, old saying, like, if you love them, let them go, like that kind of thing. Like, if you truly love something, then you love what they are and who you are together, but won't try and keep them back or hold them back or stop them from reaching their full potential, all that kind of stuff. And so I think that the danger for Jedi is when love gets turned into an automatic attachment, or they don't have the training to be able to let go or to save people. I mean, that is what Anakin's real problem is that he didn't have the support to, emotionally walk him through why he needed to let go of some of his obsessions. And, the Jedi Order was so against him caring about anything, they didn't even let him save his mom. And I mean, it was just really, it turned him into obsession and then went into danger. And I just think that was a problem. And I've thought that since 1999 or whenever those movies started coming out. And I started making these arguments before I knew I was going to write Temptation, when I was writing Path of Deceit and was starting to develop the very philosophical and mostly friendly arguments that Marta and Kevmo were having about the nature of the Force. And I think Marta is the one who first says, people have to be in relationship. And so if Jedi aren't in relationship, what are they really doing? How can you care about anything? How can you believe in justice if you aren't in relationship with people? Like that. So it was something like that.
Yeah.
And so I was already planting seeds. I didn't realize I was already planting seeds. But I was, for how I was going to figure out the breakthrough that Avar was going to be able to have. And it really took working with Charles and George in particular, with what they were doing with Avar while she was trapped in the occlusion zone. And, she was going through it on her own and having her own realizations about her relationship to the Force. And the two of them really set me up well to be able to lean into my personal philosophies about the Jedi and love and attachments and put them right in there.
Right. Not a question, but I also love when Elzar goes of all people Yoda to talk about his relationship problem. It felt like trying to like asking Yoda's daughter out to the dance or something, like waiting for him to. I'll give you permission to go. Yoda's like, well, if it brings you closer to the Force and that's love, then yeah, go for it.
Sure.
And then 200 years later, it's like, no, what are you doing? Forget. That's a separate conversation.
Yeah, I do have a lot of like headcanons about it though.
Same.
So you wrote one of my favorite chapters, not only in this book, but in the whole High Republic. And it's that chapter towards the end of Avar, Elzar, and Buryaga that you mentioned before, coming face to face with the Nameless and surviving the Nameless, which is something we haven't seen too often. Buryaga did it twice in this book. So big up. I love how much Buryaga we got. I just want to throw that out there. It's usually in the background. I love how much we got with him. But how did that chapter come to be? How many revisions to kind of come up, like you mentioned before, everyone feels the effects of the Nameless different. But kind of finally finding the Jedi way to combat this creature by taking in fear, not just giving into it, taking in the fear that the Nameless creating them. And then Avar and Buryaga, which are so connected to the whole universe and to the Force itself, to be the ones who take in Elzar's fear, so he could then be the one to see the Nameless and be able to attack. And at that point, I'm like, they just got together. One of the two of them is going to die. Why are you doing this to us? But no, how did that chapter, that scene came to be? And did it go through a lot of revisions to, okay, I think this is a way for the Jedi to finally come back the Nameless? As difficult as it is, it's not something they can replicate next week or something.
That chapter, the several chapters of that final battle, particularly the parts you're discussing, less so the Markian and Vernestra and Drengir stuff. Those sections were probably some of the most revised and rewritten of the whole book. While at the same time, what fundamentally happens was always there. Like that was the like one little sentence about the three of them, you know, defeating the Nameless. I can't remember exactly how I phrased it in the outline, but that one little sentence was always there. And then, of course, when it came time to write it, I was like, oh, what have I done? I promised the moon, and I don't know how to do it, except for like the vaguest ideas about Buri and what he had already done, and the, you know, the connection between Avar and Elzar. But it had to be rewritten a lot, partly for plot reasons and other people's books reasons, which frequently the climaxes of these books get affected dramatically by the other books and like trying to figure out what everybody's doing in everybody's climaxes. And like the needs of the next book in the series and that kind of thing. And so the nuance of how they come together, also how many Nameless there were, like all that kind of stuff changed every revision round. And of course you make a change like, oh, well, instead of 4 Nameless, there's only 2 Nameless. That requires a lot of rewriting and a lot of rethinking. And, you know, where's Markian going to end up? Is he going to come back and shoot Avar in the chest, which maybe was one of the things that I wrote in one version?
Oh, no.
I was afraid when, I know Vernestra's alive because of the Acolyte, when she faced up with Markian, I'm like, get away from her. So I don't want to hear that Avar getting shot was out there at one point.
She wasn't going to die.
She's going to get shot.
Elzar was just going to think she was dead.
Oh, okay, it's fine then. It's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But like, so just having, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, we need Markian to do other things faster. So he can't actually come back to them. So then I couldn't actually shoot Avar in the chest. So then Like there are just so many moving pieces. And figuring out by having lots of conversations, not only amongst the authors, but also with a story group about how exactly do we think this is working with Buri and Avar and Elzar and the Nameless? How exactly do the Nameless even work? And now how do we make this really satisfying? How do I make this really satisfying without actually explaining how the Nameless actually work, because I can't. Yeah. So like that was really challenging. Oof. At least I had messy love.
As someone who, Alberto knows this, since the Rising Storm, I've been saying the way to defeat the Leveler is through the power of friendship. And so that scene was like, I felt so validated in that moment.
I remember reading that, like, Otis gonna flip.
Because everyone's like, no, they're gonna get Darth Bane's blade, and like, it's gonna be the power of friendship.
Yeah.
So as we start to wind down, Tessa, you've mentioned your other books. You briefly mentioned Star Trek. Is there any other franchise beyond Star Wars that you would love to just tackle and write something?
Oh gosh. Right now that's really hard because I can't think of anything that's not Star Wars. Okay. I'm so consumed, except I've said this before. I've had this conversation with Zoraida actually, and I would love to write for Gargoyles, the cartoon, which is also Disney. So if any Disney people are listening, I'm your Gargoyles writer. Also,
they can do a lot of messy relationships.
That was so random. Yeah. I love it. I love it.
I mean, Gargoyles. Going back to the childhood.
Gargoyles.
There's a lot of love for messy creatures out there. That there's a lot. So Disney, you got her phone number. Got it. So just kind of finishing up with some fun questions. When the High Republic came out, a lot of people were moving like, oh, Qui-Gon Jinn would have been a great Jedi in the High Republic. Oh, if Anakin had the support that some of the High Republic Jedi get, he would have been different. If you could go the other way and had a character from the High Republic, it could be a Jedi, it could be Markion Ro, it could be Silent Graf, anyone, and put them in a different era of Star Wars, prequel trilogy, original, sequel, Rebels. Do you have a character you might want to just see how they react in another era of Star Wars?
Yoda.
I don't know. Yeah. I really do think, despite how, rough everything is for the High Republic Jedi, things are so much worse for the whole galaxy in like every other era. Because, the Empire is the evil Republic, basically. And so I guess I would love to be like, well, maybe Kevmo would still be alive if he lived in a different era. But on the other hand, maybe he wouldn't be. And I kind of hate to subject him to that, because one of my favorite things about Kevmo is that he loved being a Jedi. Yeah. And there really aren't any other time periods right now where the Jedi are happy to be Jedi. I mean, like, they're either on the run, or they're struggling in some way, or they know on some level maybe that everything around them is crumbling and the Jedi suck. Maybe that's just one person's opinion. But so that's my favorite thing about the High Republic is the Jedi trying to be good. Like, that's their priority, both as individuals and as a community. They're trying to be good, and they have at this time, the power and resources to not only try and be good themselves, but to actually help other people on a grand scale. And so it does kind of hurt me to think about plucking any of them out of that opportunity and putting them in somewhere else, even though they might be of a great help.
It's weird to think that Markion Ro took over half the galaxy, and it's gonna get worse because Palpatine takes over the whole galaxy. It's like, oh my god,
Markion is actually a good guy, dude.
He's their only hope. He's their only hope.
Oh, that is what he says.
I'll just put this out there. Kevmo teaching Rey about the Jedi, that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, that would be really nice.
Yeah.
He'd be. I like to think he would have grown up to be a great teacher.
Yeah.
So Tessa, last question. So
Okay.
Star Wars has existed since 1977. You mentioned it was Return of the Jedi, the first movie you watched in a drive-in. What is it about Star Wars that has made it last the test of time? How is it that in 2024 we are talking about Star Wars and new stories and new eras? What do you think is that X factor that Star Wars has?
I think that it started out as a very hope. It was about hope constantly. It was about rebels fighting against something so much bigger than them and finding little ways and big ways to win. And I think that most people really respond to stories like that. And then in the longer run, Star Wars has been willing to change and invite in not only new creators, but marginalized creators and people with different perspectives and different experiences of Star Wars who have been able to expand it and make it even more welcoming to viewers and readers, because ultimately, that's what, it's for, is for, people to watch and read and share and create their own versions. And I, as fraught as a lot of the conversations have always been about who's in charge of Star Wars and, what's canon and what's not. I do think ultimately the willingness and ability to change on a huge scale over time and over, decades of political changes in the world. I think those two things are what make it last.
Okay, I love that answer.
Yeah, love it. Great. And it's why I think the High Republic has connected with so many people. It's all the different voices out there. And we all maybe love one book for something else. And like you mentioned, you love doing the relationship. And it's a lot of part of the Star Wars fandom that loves those type of relationships. And maybe I love all the Force stuff. And that's what brings me into it. So having all those different voices, like you mentioned, is what also helps keep this franchise going. And the hope is always there. All right. Before we finish, thanks to the people in the chat. Sorry we couldn't get to you guys, but Dale, our friend Dale was here. Brennan, Avengers Rising, Willon, thanks for joining us today, and especially Tessa. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We learned a lot, not just about this book, but also I think we take for granted all the background, all the like you mentioned, working with so many books at the same time and talking with other authors because they're working on something before you even get to it. Plus, you have to set it up for the next one. It's how much connection there is between you guys to tell this cohesive story of 23 books, still going 19, but since book 11, thinking about there's a lot going on out there. We only see one book at a time, but thank you for giving us that kind of little background peek behind the curtain how things work. All right, so again, thank you so much for being here. You guys follow Tessa on all her social medias. There's I think I put on the show notes below. And Star Wars, not Star Wars, anything she's working on. If you like messy relationships, go check it out.
That's right.
I want to know how Avar and Elzar's story ends. Now I'm always been interested.
Yeah, light candles in your hearts for Charles. He's working on it.
Oh my goodness. I don't know. Oti, anything else before we say goodbye to her?
No, this was awesome. Thank you so much, Tessa. This was very fun.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Hopefully we can do this next time. With your next one, we can all cry together on the floor. So thank you guys. We'll be back on Saturday with our regular show talking about the great episode of The Acolyte. Stay safe, be safe, and like Ava Chris would say, live today, I try to find hope tomorrow. Help is coming. See you next week. Thank you, Tessa.